Welcome to the city's committee hearing on infrastructure concerns on the various municipalities throughout the state of New York. We're beginning a little earlier because I think all the principals, at least for the beginning, are here, and I'm looking forward to hearing it. To tell you the absolute truth, I'm a New York City boy myself, and of course we in New York City don't have infrastructure problems. That's a joke. We're going to get to them next week in about 10 days or so. But being city's chairman for the past year and listening avidly to the radio each morning and listening to all the water main breaks that I've been hearing in and around the area gave me great concern. And so when I was contemplating over the past summer about what we're going to do with this committee, well, I figured let me do what I think at least some of the cities are interested in, and that's discussion about infrastructure and what their concerns are, what the state can do to help the various localities, and where we're going to get the money, because I suspect it's going to cost quite a bit. At any rate, that's why we're here today, and that's why we're going to be in Rochester on Thursday, and then we'll be in the great city of New York in the borough of the Bronx, my home borough, my home district, to have our last hearing on February 11th. For those of you who are about to speak and will be speaking, I know many of you have given us written testimony, and that's great. And you can read it if you wish. If you want to summarize it, that's good too. We're not trying to elongate this hearing, but we certainly don't want to stifle anything you want to say. Okay, so all the speakers, please just introduce yourself and your title so we have that for the record. And I certainly hope the people up in the recording booth is recording all this. I've never chaired a meeting all by myself before, so they say first time's the best, so let's enjoy. We're starting today with the city of Albany and the mayor of the city of New York. I think I met you once, Madam Mayor, maybe at the dedication or in regards to the memorial we have, the Veterans Memorial right across the street from the city. I know we were working, and they did a great job fixing up that memorial, and it's a wonderful thing that we got it done and we got it properly lit, and hopefully there won't be any more desecration of that monument. So we welcome you here, and I turn it right over to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, and I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, you asking us to come here to talk about infrastructure. And I will summarize what is in the slides that I provided. I'm going to talk about three areas of infrastructure. One is our sewers and water pipes, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about our roads, and then I'm going to talk about broadband and what we're doing and the investments that we're making in the city of Albany around broadband, which is a really important part of infrastructure for the 21st century. The oldest water main that in the city of Albany sits right below City Hall on Eagle Street, across the street from us. It was installed in 1851, and it continues to provide water to this day. The water department has a pristine source of water, the Alcove Reservoir, which is located in Albany County. We rely on about 44,000 feet of 48-inch cast iron to carry water from that reservoir to our filtration plant, and then about another 58,000 feet of pipe that carries it from the filtration plant here into our holding point in Loudonville, where we hold the water that's then distributed and used during the day. So we have a wonderful source of water. It's clean. The reservoir is completely off limits. There is no boating. There's no recreation. And we are doing some really exciting things with the DEC and the Nature Conservancy to ensure that we're maintaining the forest around that reservoir so that we can maintain that wonderful source of water. But it is being carried throughout the city in various pipes. So, but I will say that one of our greatest assets is our location, because we are at this epicenter for both transportation, clean water, abundant water, as well as, and that puts us at a tremendous advantage, I think, compared to many cities. And I think all of upstate benefits from that. And it's why, we continue to be optimistic about future investment. I want to briefly talk about the executive budget, which does include water infrastructure investments, the investments in the Thruway Authority, roads and bridges, and broadband. All of those are investments that are important to upstate cities. And if you look at our water and sewer infrastructure, we have more than 400 miles of water pipeline throughout the city. We have about 900 miles of sewers and storm sewer pipelines. Some of them are combined. And we are subject to a consent order to reduce runoff into the Hudson River. We entered into that compact with a number of other municipalities along the river, and that is estimated to be an investment of about $110 million over the next 15 years, of which the city of Albany is responsible for approximately half of that cost. So I would like to draw your attention to the 6th slide, which shows our 400 miles of water mains. And you can see there that the mains that are in red are mains that date back to the 1800s through 1920. And so the age of the pipe in and of itself isn't necessarily an indication that it needs to be replaced. And so we spend a lot of time ensuring that we're monitoring our pipelines and looking at the materials, and looking at, a lot of it depends on the soils that they are in, that can have a corrosive effect. And so it's really understanding where the pipes are and how they sit, because quite frankly, some of the older pipes are much thicker and have proven to be lasting long beyond what was initially indicated as their useful life. So as we look at our infrastructure, we are proactive in the investments that we make, but we also are not immune to the impacts of what we think is global climate change, because we are experiencing more intense storms, storms that are delivering more rain in a shorter period of time. And so for us, that is one of the biggest challenges associated with our infrastructure. For us, there's no such thing as a 100-year storm anymore. A 100-year storm merely talks about the amount of rainfall, but we have had about 4 100-year events just in the last 5 to 6 years alone. In August of 2014, we had a 3-inch storm that dropped about 3 inches of rain in less than an hour. It caused unprecedented flooding in the city. Streets, cars, and homes were severely damaged. And in looking at our response to that, we could no longer simply say to residents, well, this is a 100-year event, because we continue to see these intense storms. So we are investing, we invest currently about $3 million of our department's, our water department's budget every year in capital improvements. And this year, the department's going to invest approximately $5 million in additional flood mitigation efforts. We have 2 very large flood mitigation projects that are going to be are slated to be completed this year to relieve the flooding that occurred and the damage that caused, because it did cause severe property damage. And so this is being done in part through funding that has been made available through the state, and is critically important to the investments that we are making. We are improving one of our streets, Quail Street, which was in need of upgrading, and we were able to use green infrastructure money to do a green infrastructure project there, so that as we look at the investments that we're making in our infrastructure, it's important that we look at ways to use those projects as mitigation projects as well. Porous pavement, investments in other types of technology. The investments that we're making on Quail Street, for example, will allow the first 3 inches of any rainstorm to be held, so that it doesn't immediately enter our storm sewer and combined sewer systems, and that will help tremendously in reducing flooding. We are making investments, and we continue to be very vigilant around preventive maintenance. So investments in cameras, investments in being able to maintain our water and sewer. One of the challenges that we have are old valves that break. So proactively identifying where those challenges are and doing proactive maintenance, I think, has helped the city of Albany to deal with an aging infrastructure and make sure that we're making the right investments. So it's not about just simply ripping everything out and starting over again. Much of the infrastructure that is there is in good shape. That said, in 2014, we had emergency repairs to 127 service breaks, and in 2015, that number increased to 145. So we do continue to have challenges in responding to water main and sewer main breaks. So I'd like to turn to, but I guess the broader message is, so it's important to have funding available to municipalities that we can tap into for infrastructure projects, and we have been successful in being able to utilize those funds. We're looking at the investment that is happening out in the western edge of the city, particularly around the Harriman campus, and we were successful in getting funding to fund for the engineering to expand the capacity out there so that we can continue to have growth and investment in that portion of our city. Turning to our roads and bridges, we have seen tremendous investment from the state in some of the infrastructure in the city of Albany. We have an arterial, Route 85, that is a state-owned highway that was in terrible condition in the city of Albany. The state reconstructed it in the town of Bethlehem, and they are now in the process. Construction began in 2015 on a nearly $20 million project to reconstruct the portion of Route 85 in the city of Albany. And that carries a significant amount of traffic from the suburbs into the city. So it is an important arterial, and we're very pleased that the state is making that investment. Roads continue to be a challenge for cities. As you know, we are responsible for maintaining, plowing, and paving state and county-owned roads once they're in a municipality. When they're outside the municipality, in towns and villages, it's the state's responsibility. And so that is a significant challenge for the city of Albany because we have a population that nearly doubles every day. And so the demand and wear and tear on our roads, because we are the capital city and because we are one of the central cities here in this region, continues to be a challenge for us. As you probably all know, because you travel on 787 at some point in time, that is also the source of significant investment. And we are working very closely with the DOT. There's been a study to determine what the long-term usefulness of that particular roadway is. We would love to see an investment in sort of reducing the size of 787. It cuts us off from the river. And so we are investing in a project along the Corning Preserve with $5 million in federal funding to slow traffic down on some of the access roads, increase the width of the bike lanes so that we can really try to calm traffic and reconnect the city to the riverfront. That is a tremendous source of investment and untapped investment in the city of Albany, and I'm happy to report that the New York State DOT does work very closely with us and consults with us on the investments that it's making. And we just encourage to continue to, as you look at investments in infrastructure, particularly around roadways, that we invest for the future of transportation. And not necessarily the present state. We are seeing a reduction in the number of young people who are owning cars, and so in looking at what the demand is going to be, we really would like to see that investment take into account the studies that are underway or have been undertaken both at the U.S. Department of Transportation level. They've looked out to 2040, and in New York State, which has looked out to 2030, to really meet demands for additional public transportation, which we're seeing high demand for in this region and in this city, as well as traffic calming opportunities on our roadways so that they are truly complete streets and available for pedestrians, bikers, and all users of those roadways. Another infrastructure investment that's significant in the city of Albany has to do with our trees and sidewalks. The emerald ash borer is a continued concern in the city of Albany. We have identified literally thousands of trees that have been impacted by this, and so we are looking at funding sources, because as we have to take trees down, at the local level, we hear about it. We get phone calls right away. People love their trees, and we need to invest in this infrastructure because, again, it's helps to, you know, with the environment, with the look, the feel, and the livability and walkability of our city. So that's another area that you might not think about with respect to infrastructure, but I know that the city of Albany is not the only one in the state that is dealing with this blight. And then finally, I just want to speak very briefly about our broadband efforts. You know, we are committed to ensuring that we have high-speed internet available not only to the businesses that are here, but to all of our residents. And we have undertaken a broadband study because we want to make sure that we are investing state dollars that are available for broadband investments in a way that is going to, again, serve the city of the future. So we do have a challenge in Albany. We have very limited options, and one of the things that surprised me when I became mayor was when I started getting phone calls from the residential development that's happening in our downtown. By the end of this year, we are going to have 450 new units of housing downtown. One of the biggest challenges is providing internet service to those units. Very limited options. Verizon has not invested in FiOS here. I've spoken on that at the state level. It's very frustrating that they have not delivered on a commitment to make that investment in our cities. We feel as though we are being circumvented, and there's high demand for it, but that investment is not occurring here. And we also have challenges even getting our cable company to make the investments that are needed in our downtown to provide internet service at the speeds that people need in the 21st century. So we are conducting a study, and we look forward to putting forward a very compelling case for investments, the right investments in the city of Albany to ensure broadband access. And the end. There's more information in the materials that I provided, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Sheehan, thank you very much. Before we answer or ask some questions, I want to recognize some of the fine members who have joined us. And to the members, by the way, it wasn't that you were late. We just started early, okay? And so you won't be marked late at any rate. I want to introduce to my left the new ranking member on this committee's cities, Andy Goodell. Thank you, Andy. And on my right, members from my Democratic Conference, Steve Otis, Joanne Simon, and Shelley Mayer. We thank you all for coming. Mr. Mayor, you mentioned a lot of things. It was all wonderful, interesting testimony. If you had to say the top infrastructure concern for your city, what would it be? And number two, do you think you have the funding you need to deal with any of the problems that they may have?
The biggest concern that we have is, the biggest concern that I have is being able to make investments in our roads and sidewalks. We have neighborhoods that have been long neglected. We have significant challenges with blight in the city of Albany. And we also have significant investment that is occurring. And so as investors come into the city of Albany, as businesses look to locate here, we need to be able to demonstrate to them that we are going to match their investment in creating jobs and in their businesses with that infrastructure investment for the streets and the sidewalks where they're located. So I'll give you an example. We recently underwent creating an overlay zone for our warehouse district because we're seeing a significant interest in new businesses and new types of businesses moving into that district. And we've seen an increase in jobs there. But if you look at the infrastructure surrounding that warehouse district, there are issues with stormwater runoff. There are issues with the ability to deliver the level of sewer and water service that we're going to need there. And then there is just the roadways themselves. It's a warehouse district, so there is a lot of trucking activities. The roads are really beat up. The lighting is, street lighting is not what it should be. And so being able to commit to making that follow-on investment as we're trying to drive more economic development in the city is a real challenge. And it's very complex. I didn't talk about the lighting infrastructure, but I know a number of cities are looking at, it's a huge expense for us. It's about $6 million a year in operating expense that we have associated with our lighting. So the investments that need to be made in LED lighting and in looking at how we put together an infrastructure that is something that we can afford to then sustain over the long run. But I would like for us to be able to have the ability to access funding to make infrastructure investments that are follow-on investments, that public part of a public-private partnership, as we see more investment happening in our residential growth downtown and in job growth throughout the city.
So are you suggesting, and maybe I heard wrong, that possibly we here in the state of New York have a infrastructure reservoir fund set up? We don't have anything like that,
right,
as far as I know. And is that what you were possibly suggesting? Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things that we need to look at is that, there's only so much that we can borrow. We have a certain amount of debt service. The state doesn't like us, and nobody wants to see more than 10% of their operating budget go towards debt service. Currently, the city of Albany is at 12%. So our ability to borrow in order to make those investments is limited. When we look at what the opportunities are in the city of Albany, for lack of funding to put in a new sidewalk and street lights, are we really hurting our ability to bring in that new employer and those new jobs? We recently had a call center that opened in our downtown area near the warehouse district. Hundreds of employees who now are walking to places to eat and are out on the street. We need to make the investments, and it's a 24/7. We need to make the investments in lighting, in sidewalks, in traffic calming, in order for us to, I think, really build on this as attracting that next employer, that next investment. And again, our ability to borrow to do that is very limited. Mm-hmm. We can borrow about $1 million. We're really investing about $1 million a year in an infrastructure that I think if we could demonstrate, again, an investment that is aligned with private investment that's occurring, whether that's investments in our neighborhoods where we're having vacant and abandoned houses invested in, and people are investing in them and bringing them back to life, that's tied to that private investment, I think would be a great asset for our cities.
Now, this pot of money that might serve as a reservoir to Albany and all the other municipalities around the state, any ideas of where that money can come from? A dedicated fund of sorts, more taxes? This is an election year. Be careful what you say.
Well, the challenge that we have in our cities is that as we have the property tax available to us, and we have a tax cap. And the city of Albany can't afford to raise taxes even within the tax cap because we're not competitive with our surrounding suburbs. And so I think that in looking at the capital investments, I think finding funding sources, whether it's using the state's borrowing power in a responsible way to make these capital investments, or setting aside settlement funds, finding a way for there to be some sort of repayment mechanism, if we can be creative about somehow creating a revolving fund that would be replenished through the public-private partnership investments that we're making, are all things that I think would be important to explore.
Good. I'll turn it over to some of my colleagues to see if they have any questions. Interestingly enough, with the as different as Albany is from the Bronx, and I've got similar problems with broadband and FiOS and that coming into a rather large development that I have in my area called Co-op City, which contains about 50,000 people, and getting them in there is a frustrating part too. So we share a commonality here. Mr. Goodell, I know you have a few questions.
You're right. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mayor, for being here. I had a couple questions as it related to funding and wanted your ideas. On your water and sewer infrastructure, do you have a separate water and sewer bill that's a user-based bill that goes out to all your customers?
Yes, we do. And our water authority, we have an operating agreement with them, so we provide their employees, and we are reimbursed for those employees. So, but the water department is a separate authority. They retain all of their revenue, and they only reimburse us for the cost of their employees and some other additional services that we provide.
And are your revenues from that sufficient to maintain a long-term capital investment program?
The water department has been successful in maintaining a long-term capital investment program. The needs associated with some of these storm events that we're having has proved challenging, and clearly the need that's going to be associated with the consent order over the next 15 years is going to place a demand on that. But we are seeing that we have a water department that is very well run, is really focused on using any additional revenue to make investments in the infrastructure, really shifting to that asset management model that is a best practice for cities.
Have you borrowed funds through the Environmental Facilities Corporation to assist in that project, in those projects?
Yes, the Quail Street project was using EFC funds were used for that project, and so we have tapped into those sources in the past.
Our chairman has mentioned the concept of a reserve, and the EFC, as you know, is a revolving loan fund, which the state funds as well. Is that the type of concept that you would support if we had something similar for more infrastructure needs like roads and bridges and things of that nature?
I think that is a great resource, but I also think that if we could look again at the investments that we're making through the Regional Economic Development Council, the private investment that's coming in even outside of that program, and looking at what infrastructure needs would support that activity, that some of that might be related to sewer and water, but some of it might be related to street lighting or sidewalks or, very importantly, street calming for many of our streets and roads in the city of Albany. As I said, many of the roads that come through the city of Albany are either state or county roads, but we're responsible for the infrastructure here in the city as far as plowing, paving, not on 85, but other projects along those roads.
I had one other question as it related to, well, maybe a couple, that relate to sidewalks and economic development. Do you have a separate assessment for sidewalks?
We do not.
I see. And do you include the cost of sidewalks and road and infrastructure upgrades when considering an economic development package to the potential new employer?
We do, from time to time, we are able to have the cost of new sidewalk. For example, if a project is a massive project like what you're seeing on New Scotland Avenue near Albany Medical Center, that can be a cost that's shifted to the project itself to replace those sidewalks, to replace the streetlights. But for smaller projects where there's not that level of disruption, that's typically not the case. And the challenge in the city of Albany is because our tax rate is so much higher and we're competing with the surrounding suburbs to bring business in, that it really limits what we can place on the developer because when they're looking at the total cost of doing business in the city of Albany, it's higher than what they're seeing in the suburbs.